Okay, let's try to unpack this. It's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it? You have this leader, right, with a track record that suggests, well, a certain view on Islam, and then boom, these appointments happen that, on the surface at least, look pretty favorable to some prominent Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite the puzzle. What do you think is really going on here?
It definitely presents an interesting contradiction. We're diving into these recent appointments, Hamza Yusuf and Ismail Royer, to White House advisory roles dealing with religious affairs. And like you said, this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's set against, well, the whole complex picture of U.S.-Middle East relations and, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is always sensitive.
Exactly. And we've got this YouTube analysis that breaks down these appointments, the reactions, the context. So what we want to do for you today is really try to get under the skin of this thing. Our goal, really, is to understand the different angles, the potential strategies behind what look like, well, pretty unexpected moves. Let's try to move past the simple labels, pro this, anti that, and dig into the actual complexities.
Agreed. So maybe let's start with Hamza Yusuf. He's a very well-respected Islamic scholar, co-founder of Zaytuna College, widely seen as one of the 500 most influential Muslims globally. That carries, significant weight.
Absolutely. Huge profile. But it wasn't straightforward, was it? Almost immediately there was controversy. Accusations popped up that his views on Gaza, well, they lined up maybe a bit too closely with U.S. and Israeli positions. And then there was that incident with the pro-Palestinian protesters. Can you remind us what happened there?
Right. He was apparently heckled during a meeting, and his advice to them was essentially to stop the protests. His reasoning, quite starkly put, was, it's not reasonable to think that the unjust being unjust will lend an ear to our pleas for justice. He sort of suggested that quiet endurance could sometimes be the only path, the way to survive.
Which, you can imagine, drew a fair bit of fire.
Okay.
And then there's his other role, right? As vice president of that UAE-based forum, the one promoting peace in Muslim societies. What's the contention around that?
Well, the main issue is the forum's very close connections to the UAE government. That's raised some eyebrows. And on top of that, Yusuf has publicly endorsed the Abraham Accords. The normalization deals between Israel and several Arab nations, including the UAE, very prominently. And this is where the geopolitics in these appointments really seem to intersect.
Right, because that relationship, the one between the UAE and the Trump administration, it was notably strong, wasn't it? I remember reports about a really warm welcome during a state visit, talk of huge investments, even a pretty significant personal gift, that necklace.
Yes, the source material we looked at really highlights that. It mentions the special welcome, this promise of $1 trillion in investment, and the Bahraini pendant necklace, which is apparently a very high honor, signifying really close ties with the Emirati leadership. So that naturally leads to a pretty big question.
Which is, could Yusuf's appointment somehow be linked to the UAE's position? Their clear alignment with both the U.S. and Israel at the time. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if there's another layer here beyond just his scholarly reputation. Was there maybe a strategic element considering the UAE's influence?
It's certainly a valid line of inquiry. Definitely is something the source implies we should consider. Now let's shift gears a bit to the other appointment, Ismail Royer. He's also known for work promoting peace, harmony within Islam. So again, on the face of it, it looks like a positive outreach move.
But, then we hear about criticism from pro-Israel groups about his appointment. What's the basis for that criticism? What's the story there?
That criticism seems to focus on alleged past links to extremist organizations. So that immediately throws a wrench into the works, doesn't it? It complicates the idea that these are just simple goodwill appointments. And it raises that key question. Given the administration's strong pro-Israel stance, why appoint someone with that kind of history?
And the source we're drawing from, it offers let's say a rather cynical explanation for that. What's that theory?
The source basically puts forward the idea that a possible motive could have been to, and I'm quoting here, taint the image of Muslims by appointing representatives who have links to extremism. The thinking, according to this source, is that by elevating someone with that kind of background, it might, associate the wider Muslim community with extremism in the public eye.
Wow. That's a pretty heavy suggestion. And the source seems to think the administration knew exactly what they were doing, that they were aware of Royer's past and Yusuf's views on Israel-Palestine, implying it was all quite calculated.
That's the core implication, yes, that these weren't accidental choices. Now, maybe we should zoom out a little. Look at these appointments in the broader picture of U.S.-Middle East relations during that specific time.
Okay. We know there were those high-profile visits to the Middle East, And like we mentioned, big talk about financial commitments.
Indeed, the source mentions trillions of dollars in investments potentially flowing into the U.S., but it also points out something quite striking. A real silence, apparently. No public condemnation or even much discussion, it seems, of what the source calls a 2-year-long brutal assault on Palestinians during these diplomatic trips. And interestingly, apparently not much pressure from the UAE or Saudi Arabia to bring it up with the U.S. leadership either.
Which leads the source to make a pretty strong statement about the hypocritical nature of today's politicians. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, the argument essentially is this desire to sort of have it both ways. To gain the benefits, economic, political, from dealing with Islamic nations, while also being careful not to offend leaders in countries seen as having more Islamophobic stances. The source suggests this leads to a strategy of wanting Muslim representatives, sure, but specifically choosing ones who are, and again, this is the source's phrasing, more aligned with the government rather than the Muslims they supposedly represent, implying that, political convenience might trump genuine representation.
Okay, so if we try to pull all these threads together, we're still wrestling with this central puzzle. Are these appointments a genuine, if perhaps clumsy, attempt to build bridges? Or are there more, let's say, strategic, maybe even manipulative reasons behind them?
Exactly. The source material really lays out two main possibilities. One, okay, maybe it's some form of engagement with certain Muslim voices, even if those voices are controversial or selective. The other interpretation, it's a much more calculated political game, one with potentially negative long-term effects on how the Muslim community as a whole is perceived.
Right, and the analysis we looked at doesn't really land on a definitive answer, does it? It kind of leaves it open. It highlights the complexity, suggests these different layers could all be playing a part.
Precisely. That's the key takeaway. These appointments, especially when you put them in context, they just show how incredibly complex and sometimes contradictory international politics and religious dynamics can be on the world stage.
So, thinking about all this, it really makes you pause, doesn't it? When we see moves like this, what does it even mean for a leader to be called pro-Muslim or anti-Islam? Are those labels even useful? How should we, evaluate these kinds of actions, especially when you see all these potential strategic undercurrents? And maybe more importantly, what are the lasting consequences for the communities involved when these sorts of political calculations are made? It's certainly a lot to chew on.
It really pushes us, I think, to look past the easy sound bites, the political spin, to really try and critically examine the actions themselves and what they might mean down the line for different groups and for international relations generally.
So for you listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. We'd encourage you to keep digging into these complex issues yourselves. Don't just accept the simple narratives. Try to draw your own informed conclusions based on, everything we've tried to unpack here today.